I was just a child when my world fell apart, though at the time, I didn't have the words to describe what was happening. I remember the way the sunlight used to filter through the curtains in our small living room, painting golden stripes on the faded rug. My mother would hum softly as she folded laundry, and my father's laughter would echo from the kitchen as he told stories about his day at the factory. Back then, I believed that happiness was something simple, something you could hold in your hands like a warm cup of tea on a cold morning. I didn't know that happiness could be so fragile, that it could shatter in an instant, leaving only sharp pieces behind. The day everything changed started like any other. I was 8 years old, with scabbed knees and tangled hair, more interested in chasing the neighbor's cat than in the grown-up conversations that floated above my head. My mother was making soup, the smell of onions and carrots filling the air, and my father was late coming home. I remember the way my mother kept glancing at the clock, her hands trembling just a little as she stirred the pot. I didn't understand her worry, not then. I thought fathers were like the sun, sometimes hidden by clouds, but always coming back. When the knock finally came at the door, it was gentle, almost apologetic. I ran to open it, expecting to see my father with his crooked smile and a bag of sweets. Instead, there were 2 men in uniforms, their faces solemn, their hats held in their hands. My mother's spoon clattered to the floor. I remember the way she pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking. The men spoke in low voices, words like accident, and sorry, and nothing we could do. I didn't understand, not really. I only knew that my mother fell to her knees, sobbing, and that the world suddenly felt colder, emptier. That night, the house was silent. My mother sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. I sat on the floor beside her, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to make sense of the emptiness that had settled over us. I wanted to ask where my father had gone, when he would be back, but the words stuck in my throat. I was afraid that if I spoke, the silence would swallow me whole. The days that followed blurred together. Neighbors came and went, bringing casseroles and awkward hugs. My mother moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes red and swollen, her voice barely more than a whisper. I tried to be helpful, to do the things my father used to do, taking out the trash, feeding the cat, fixing the leaky faucet with trembling hands. But nothing I did could fill the space he had left behind. School became a refuge, a place where I could pretend, for a few hours, that nothing had changed. My teacher, Mrs. Evans, was kind, her voice gentle as she guided me through math problems and spelling tests. But even there, the world felt different. The other children looked at me with wide eyes, whispering behind their hands. I became the girl whose father died, a label that clung to me like a second skin. I hated it, hated the way it made me feel small and broken. At home, my mother grew quieter, her movements slow and deliberate. She stopped humming as she worked, stopped smiling at my silly jokes. Sometimes, I would find her sitting in the dark, staring at the empty chair where my father used to sit. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but I didn't know how. I was just a child, lost in a world that no longer made sense. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of grief settled over us like a heavy blanket. My mother struggled to pay the bills, to keep food on the table. I learned to go without, to make do with what we had. I stopped asking for new shoes when mine grew too tight, stopped complaining when dinner was just bread and butter. I grew up quickly, out of necessity rather than choice. But even in the darkest moments, there were small sparks of hope. Mrs. Evans would slip me extra snacks at lunchtime, her eyes kind and understanding. The neighbor, Mrs. Patel, would invite me over to play with her children, her home filled with laughter and the smell of spices. These small acts of kindness became lifelines, reminders that the world was not entirely cruel. One evening, as I sat on the porch steps, watching the sun dip below the horizon, my mother joined me. She sat in silence for a long time, her hands folded in her lap. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I know it's hard, sweetheart. I know you miss him. I do too." She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "But we have to keep going. We have to find a way to live, even when it hurts." Her words settled in my heart, heavy and true. I realized then that I wasn't alone in my pain, that my mother was struggling just as much as I was. We were both broken, but we still had each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would not let grief define me. I would not let the darkness swallow me whole. I was just a child, yes, but I was also my father's daughter, strong, stubborn, and determined to survive. No matter how hard life became, I refused to give up. The seasons changed, but the ache in our home remained. Winter crept in, cold and relentless, seeping through the cracks in our old windows. I remember wrapping myself in my father's old coat, the sleigh eaves far too long, the scent of his aftershave still clinging to the fabric. It was a small comfort, a way to keep him close even as the world moved on without him. My mother worked longer hours at the diner down the street, her hands red and raw from washing dishes, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I learned to make dinner, simple meals of soup and toast, and to tuck myself into bed at night, listening to the wind rattle the glass. At school, I became quieter, more withdrawn. The other children seemed to sense the change in me, giving me a wide berth in the hallways. I watched them laugh and play, their lives untouched by the kind of loss that had become my constant companion. Sometimes I envied their innocence, their ability to find joy in the smallest things. But I also resented them, resented the way they could move through the world without the weight of grief pressing down on their shoulders. Mrs. Evans noticed the change. One afternoon, she called me to her desk after class, her eyes gentle but searching. "How are you holding up, Emma?" she asked, her voice soft. I shrugged, not trusting myself to speak. She reached across the desk, placing her hand over mine. "It's okay to be sad. It's okay to miss him." Her words unlocked something inside me, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. Mrs. Evans didn't say anything more. She just sat with me, her presence a quiet reassurance that I wasn't as alone as I felt. That night, I wrote my father a letter. I poured out everything I couldn't say aloud, the anger, the confusion, the longing for things to go back to the way they were. I told him about the empty chair at the dinner table, about the way Mom cried when she thought I was asleep, about how much I missed his stories and his laughter. I folded the letter and tucked it under my pillow, a secret just for me. It didn't bring him back, but it made the ache a little less sharp. As winter gave way to spring, small changes began to take root. My mother started humming again, just a little, as she washed the dishes. She planted flowers in the window box, bright splashes of color against the gray of our world. I began to find comfort in routine, in the simple act of waking up each morning and facing the day. There were still hard moments, nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, days when the memories threatened to overwhelm me, but I learned to ride the waves, to let the pain come and go like the tide. One Saturday, my mother surprised me with a picnic in the park. We sat on a threadbare blanket beneath a blossoming tree, eating peanut butter sandwiches and watching the clouds drift by. For the first time in months, I heard her laugh, a real, honest laugh that made my heart ache with longing and hope. She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We're going to be okay, Emma," she said. "It won't always hurt this much." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the pain would fade, that happiness would find its way back to us. But I also knew that grief was not something you simply outgrow. It becomes a part of you, woven into the fabric of your being. Still, I clung to her words, letting them anchor me when the world felt unsteady. As the school year ended, Mrs. Evans encouraged me to join the summer reading club at the library. At first I was hesitant. The idea of being around other children, of pretending to be normal, felt impossible. But my mother insisted, her voice gentle but firm. "You need to be around people, sweetheart. You need to remember how to laugh." The library became my sanctuary. I lost myself in stories of faraway places and brave heroes, in worlds where anything was possible. The librarian, Mrs. Carter, took a liking to me, recommending books and inviting me to help with the younger children's story hour. For the first time since my father's death, I felt a spark of joy, a sense of belonging that I had thought was lost forever. One afternoon, as I was shelving books, a girl named Lily approached me. She was new in town, her family having moved from the city. She smiled shyly, her arms full of books. "Do you want to read together?" she asked. I hesitated, the old fear rising in my chest, but something in her eyes made me nod. We sat in a corner of the library, reading aloud and sharing stories. Lily didn't ask about my father, didn't treat me like I was broken. She just accepted me, scars and all. Our friendship grew slowly, built on shared secrets and whispered dreams. We spent long afternoons exploring the woods behind my house, building forts and pretending to be explorers. With Lily, I could forget, if only for a little while, the heaviness that clung to me. She reminded me that life could still be sweet, that laughter was not a betrayal of my grief. At home, my mother noticed the change. She smiled more often, her eyes brighter. We began to talk about my father, sharing memories and stories, letting the pain breathe instead of locking it away. It wasn't easy. Some days, the sadness was too much, and we would sit together in silence, holding hands and letting the tears fall. But slowly, the darkness began to lift, replaced by something softer, more bearable. I realized then that healing was not a straight line. It was messy and unpredictable, full of setbacks and small victories. But with each passing day, I grew stronger, more resilient. I learned that it was okay to miss my father, to feel sad and angry and lost. But I also learned that it was okay to laugh, to hope, to dream of a future where happiness was possible. Summer faded into autumn, and with it came a new sense of normalcy. The leaves turned gold and crimson, swirling around my feet as I walked to school each morning. I had grown taller over the months, my face a little older, my eyes a little wiser. Grief had changed me, but it had not broken me. I carried my father's memory with me, tucked away like a secret talisman, a reminder of where I came from and what I had survived. Lily and I became inseparable. We spent our afternoons doing homework at the kitchen table, our laughter filling the house in a way I hadn't heard since before my father died. My mother welcomed her with open arms, grateful for the light Lily brought into our lives. Sometimes I would catch my mother watching us, a soft smile on her lips, as if she were remembering her own childhood, before loss and hardship had carved lines into her face. One crisp October evening, my mother sat me down at the table, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "Emma," she began, her voice trembling, "I've been offered a second job. It's at the grocery store, stocking shelves at night. It means I'll be gone more, but we need the money." I nodded, understanding more than she realized. I had seen the bills piling up, the worry etched into her brow. "I can help," I said quietly. "I can take care of things here." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You already do, sweetheart, more than you should have to." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the ways my life had changed. I was no longer just a child. I was a caretaker, a helper, a survivor. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but I refused to let it crush me. Instead, I let it shape me, forging strength from necessity. With my mother working 2 jobs, I took on more at home. I learned to cook simple meals, to do laundry, to keep the house tidy. I made sure my homework was done, that the cat was fed, that the lights were turned off before bed. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when the silence in the house was so thick I could hardly breathe. But I reminded myself of my promise, not to give up, no matter how hard things became. Eileen was my anchor during those long evenings. She would come over after dinner, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and we would sit together in the living room, reading or playing board games. Sometimes, we would talk about our dreams for the future, places we wanted to visit, things we wanted to do. Lily wanted to be an artist, to paint murals on city walls and fill the world with color. I wasn't sure what I wanted, not yet, but I knew I wanted to make a difference, to help people the way others had helped me. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Lily turned to me, her expression serious. "Do you ever feel like you're carrying the whole world on your shoulders?" she asked. I nodded, the truth of her words settling between us. "Sometimes I wish I could just run away, start over somewhere new." I looked at her, surprised. "But you have your family, you have everything." She shook her head. "Not everything. My parents fight a lot. Sometimes I feel invisible." I reached for her hand, understanding in a way I never had before. Grief and pain weren't just mine, they were universal, woven into the fabric of every life. As the months passed, I grew more confident in my ability to handle whatever life threw at me. I learned to ask for help when I needed it, to lean on the people who cared about me. Mrs. Evans continued to check in, inviting me to stay after school for extra help or just to talk. The librarian, Mrs. Carter, encouraged me to write, to put my thoughts and feelings down on paper. I started keeping a journal, filling its pages with memories, fears, and hopes for the future. Writing became my therapy, a way to process the chaos inside me. I wrote about my father, about the day he died, about the way the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I wrote about my mother, about her strength and her sadness, about the sacrifices she made for me. I wrote about Lily, about our friendship, and the way she made me feel less alone. Through writing, I began to understand that my story was not just one of loss, but of resilience and hope. One afternoon, Mrs. Carter announced a writing contest at the library. The theme was overcoming adversity. Lily nudged me, her eyes bright with excitement. "You have to enter," she whispered. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to share my story with the world. But that night, as I sat at my desk, I thought about all the people who had helped me, all the small acts of kindness that had kept me afloat. Maybe, I thought, my story could help someone else. I poured my heart into that essay, writing and rewriting until the words felt just right. I wrote about my father, about the pain of losing him, about the way grief had threatened to swallow me whole. But I also wrote about the people who had lifted me up, about the strength I had found within myself. I ended the essay with a promise to keep going, to keep fighting, to never give up. When I handed in my essay, my hands shook with nerves. I didn't expect to win. I just wanted to be heard, to know that my story mattered. Weeks passed and I tried not to think about the contest, focusing instead on school and helping my mother. Then, one chilly November afternoon, Mrs. Carter called me at home. "Emma," she said, her voice warm with pride, "you won first place." I stared at the phone in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest. My mother hugged me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. For the first time since my father's death, I felt truly seen, not as the girl whose world had fallen apart, but as someone who had survived, who had found the courage to keep going. Winning the contest changed something deep inside me. It wasn't just about the certificate or the applause at the library's small awards ceremony, though I'll never forget the way my mother's face glowed with pride as I read my essay aloud. It was about the way people looked at me afterward, not with pity, but with respect. For the first time, I felt like more than just a survivor. I felt like a storyteller, someone who could turn pain into something meaningful, something that might help others find their own strength. After the ceremony, Mrs. Carter pulled me aside. "Emma, your words have power," she said, her eyes shining. "Don't ever stop using your voice." I nodded, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized then that my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt lost, everyone who had ever faced darkness and chosen to keep moving forward. At school, things began to shift. My classmates who once whispered about me in the hallways now approached me with shy smiles and questions about my writing. Some even shared their own stories, about parents who had left, about siblings who were sick, about fears they'd never spoken aloud. I listened, offering the same kindness that had been given to me. I learned that everyone carries invisible burdens, that we are all fighting battles no one else can see. Lily was my biggest supporter. She cheered me on, encouraging me to enter more contests, to keep writing, to dream bigger. "You're going to be famous one day," she teased, grinning as we walked home from school. I laughed, shaking my head. "I just want to make a difference," I said. "I want to help people feel less alone." She squeezed my hand, her eyes soft. "You already do." At home, my mother's second job continued to take its toll. She grew thinner, her face drawn with fatigue, but she never complained. I tried to ease her burden as much as I could, taking on more chores, making sure she ate, leaving little notes of encouragement in her lunch bag. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear her crying softly in her room. I wanted to fix everything, to take away her pain, but I knew I couldn't. All I could do was love her, fiercely and unconditionally. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, my mother turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and pride. "You're so strong, Emma," she said quietly. "Stronger than I ever was at your age." I shook my head, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "I'm only strong because I have you," I whispered. She pulled me into a hug, holding me tight. In that moment, I realized that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about picking up the pieces, again and again, and choosing to keep going. As winter approached, the world outside grew cold and gray, Tied inside our home, there was a new sense of warmth. My mother and I decorated for the holidays, stringing lights around the windows and baking cookies in the tiny oven. Lily joined us, her laughter filling the kitchen as we danced to old Christmas songs. For the first time since my father's death, the house felt alive, filled with hope and possibility. But grief is a stubborn companion, never fully leaving, always lurking in the shadows. On Christmas Eve, as we sat around the table, I felt the ache of my father's absence more acutely than ever. I missed his booming laugh, the way he would carve the roast, the stories he would tell by the fire. My mother must have sensed my sadness, because she reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "He's here with us, Emma," she said softly. "In our hearts, in our memories. He would be so proud of you." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways my life had changed. I thought about the pain, the loss, the night spent crying into my pillow, but I also thought about the love that remained, the friends who stood by me, the mother who never gave up, the community that had lifted us up when we needed it most. I realized that even in the darkest moments, there was always a glimmer of light, a reason to keep going. The new year brought new challenges. My mother fell ill, a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. She tried to hide it, insisting she was fine, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I took on even more at home, balancing schoolwork with cooking, cleaning, and caring for her. Lily helped as much as she could, bringing over soup and helping with chores. Mrs. Evans and Mrs. Carter checked in regularly, offering support and encouragement. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush me, but I remembered my promise, not to give up, no matter how hard things became. I leaned on the people around me, accepting help when it was offered, refusing to let pride stand in the way of survival. One afternoon, as I sat by my mother's bedside, she reached for my hand, her grip weak but determined. "Emma, I need you to promise me something," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Promise me you'll keep living, no matter what happens. Promise me you'll chase your dreams, that you'll never let this world make you small." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, my heart aching with love and fear. "I promise, Mom," I whispered. "I promise." That promise became my anchor, the thing I clung to when everything else felt uncertain. I poured myself into my writing, into my friendships, into caring for my mother. I learned that hope is not a feeling, it's a choice, a decision to keep moving forward even when the path is unclear. Spring arrived slowly, as if the world itself was learning to breathe again. The trees outside our window budded with new leaves, and the air carried the scent of rain and possibility. My mother's health improved little by little, her cough easing, her cheeks regaining some color. I watched her closely, every small sign of recovery a victory, every smile a gift. We celebrated the return of warmth with picnics in the park, just the two of us, sharing sandwiches and stories beneath the wide blue sky. At school, I continued to write, my words growing bolder, my voice stronger. Mrs. Evans encouraged me to submit my work to the local newspaper, and to my surprise, they published one of my essays. Seeing my name in print was surreal, a reminder that even the smallest voices could be heard if they spoke with honesty. My classmates congratulated me, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged, not just as the girl who had survived, but as someone with something to offer. Lily and I grew closer than ever. We spent long afternoons sprawled on her bedroom floor, painting our dreams in watercolor and ink. She drew pictures of city skylines and wildflowers while I filled notebook after notebook with stories of hope and healing. We talked about the future, about leaving our small town behind and seeing the world. "One day, we'll go to Paris," Lily declared, and her eyes shining. "We'll eat croissants by the river and paint the Eiffel Tower." I laughed, the sound light and free. "And I'll write about it," I promised. "Every detail, every feeling." But even as I dreamed of the future, I remained rooted in the present, determined to make the most of every moment. I volunteered at the library, helping younger children learn to read. I joined the school's peer support group, listening to others share their struggles and offering comfort where I could. I discovered that helping others helped me too, that kindness was a balm for my own wounds. One afternoon, a girl named Sarah joined our support group. She was quiet, her eyes downcast, her voice barely audible. Over time, she began to open up, sharing her story of loss and loneliness. I recognized the pain in her words, the way she wrapped herself in silence to keep the world at bay. After one meeting, I found her sitting alone in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. I sat beside her, offering my presence, my understanding. "It gets better," I whispered. "I promise. You're not alone." She looked at me, hope flickering in her eyes. In that moment, I realized the power of connection, the way our stories could weave a net strong enough to catch even the heaviest burdens. At home, my mother and I found new ways to honor my father's memory. We planted a garden in the backyard, filling it with his favorite flowers, daisies, marigolds, and sunflowers that reached for the sky. We told stories about him as we worked, laughing at his old jokes, remembering the way he used to sing off-key while mowing the lawn. The garden became a place of healing, a living tribute to the love that had shaped our lives. As the school year drew to a close, I was invited to speak at the end-of-year assembly. The principal asked me to share my story, to talk about resilience and hope. I was nervous, my hands shaking as I stood before the crowd, but as I began to speak, the fear melted away. I told them about my father, about the pain of losing him, about the darkness that had threatened to see Makoan consume me, but I also told them about the people who had helped me, about the strength I had found within myself, about the promise I had made to keep going no matter what. When I finished, the auditorium was silent for a moment, and then applause erupted, loud and sustained. I saw my mother in the front row, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed to her heart. Lily grinned at me from the back, her eyes shining with pride. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace, a certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. That summer, Lily and I started a project at the library, collecting stories from people in our town. We interviewed neighbors, teachers, shopkeepers, anyone willing to share a piece of their past. We heard tales of hardship and triumph, of love and loss, of dreams deferred and dreams realized. Each story was unique, but they all shared a common thread: the refusal to give up, no matter how difficult life became. We compiled the stories into a book, Voices of Hope, and donated copies to the library and the local school. The project brought our community closer, reminding us all that we were not alone in our struggles. I saw the way people looked at each other differently, with more compassion, more understanding. I realized that sharing our stories was an act of courage, a way to break the silence and build bridges where there had once been walls. As the days grew longer and the sun set later, I found myself looking forward to the future with a sense of anticipation rather than fear. I knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and sorrow, but I also knew that I had the strength to face them. I had survived the worst, and in doing so, I had discovered a well of resilience I never knew existed. The summer before high school felt like a new beginning. I spent my days in the garden with my mother, our hands deep in the earth, and my evenings with Lily, our laughter echoing through the quiet streets. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. It was a part of my story, yes, but not the whole story. I had learned to carry it with grace, to let it remind me of how far I'd come, rather than how much I'd lost. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, my mother and I sat on the porch, sipping lemonade. She looked at me, her eyes soft and full of pride. "You know, Emma, I used to worry that the world would break you," she said quietly. "But you're stronger than I ever imagined. You've taught me so much about hope." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my heart. "You taught me too," I replied. "We taught each other." That night, I wrote in my journal, the words flowing easily. I wrote about the ache of missing my father, about the fear that had once threatened to swallow me whole, about his small victories that had carried me through the darkest days. I wrote about Lily, about the way her friendship had been a lifeline, about the power of kindness and connection. I wrote about my mother, about her courage and her love, about the way she had held our family together with nothing but determination and faith. As I wrote, I realized that my story was not just about survival, it was about transformation. I had been broken, yes, but I had also been rebuilt, piece by piece, stronger and more compassionate than before. I had learned that it was okay to ask for help, that vulnerability was not weakness but strength. I had learned that hope was not something you found, but something you created, day by day, choice by choice. High school brought new challenges and new opportunities. I joined the school newspaper, eager to use my voice to tell stories that mattered. I volunteered at the community center, helping younger kids with their homework, listening to their worries and dreams. I stayed close to Lily, our friendship deepening as we navigated the ups and downs of adolescence together. We made plans for the future, promising to always be there for each other, no matter where life took us. There were setbacks, of course. There were days when the grief returned, sharp and unexpected, catching me off guard. There were moments of doubt when I wondered if I was strong enough to keep going. But each time, I remembered the promise I had made to my mother, the promise I had made to myself, to never give up, to keep moving forward, to choose hope even when it seemed impossible. As graduation approached, I looked back on the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the little girl who had lost her father, who had felt so alone and afraid. I wanted to reach back through time and hold her, to tell her that she would be okay, that she would find her way. I wanted to tell her that the world was full of good people, that kindness could be found in the most unexpected places, that even the deepest wounds could heal. On the night of my graduation, I stood on the stage, my heart pounding as I looked out at the sea of faces. My mother, Lily, Mrs. Evans, Mrs. Carter, and so many others who had helped me along the way. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice steady and clear. I spoke about loss and resilience, about the power of community, about the importance of never giving up. I spoke about hope, about the way it had carried me through the darkest nights and into the light of a new day. When the ceremony ended, my mother hugged me tightly, her tears soaking into my gown. "You did it, Emma," she whispered. "You made it." I smiled through my own tears, feeling a sense of accomplishment and peace. I had survived. I had grown. I had refused to give up. As I look back now, years later, I see how every moment, every heartbreak, every act of kindness, every small victory shaped the person I became. I see how the pain of my childhood became the foundation for a life built on empathy, courage, and hope. I see how the love of my mother, the friendship of Lily, and the support of my community gave me the strength to keep going, even when the world seemed determined to break me. If you are listening to my story, if you are walking through your own darkness, I want you to know this: you are not alone. There is always hope, even when you can't see it. There is always a way forward, even when the path is hidden. You are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and more loved than you can imagine. I was just a child when my world fell apart, but I refused to give up. And that choice, more than anything, is what saved me. It can save you too.